And a pleasant good day to one and all. I would love to welcome you to the 6th virtual forum of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies. My name is Teresa Best-Downs and I will be your chair for today. Today we are tackling a massive issue that really we should probably have a whole day, a whole week to discuss, but it's an issue that is dear particularly to the SALISES heart. It is a topic that is fundamental to all forms of decision making. Where are we getting our data from? Where are we getting our information from? And so today's topic is the National Statistics, a culture of best practice, and the establishment of the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, imperatives for securing national development. Now that might be a mouthful, but there's really a lot to say on this topic. And we have a number of very distinguished persons here with us today. And so to really start off the entire session, I want to welcome all of our panelists, all of the persons that are participating as attendees. And I would like to now hand over to the Acting Director of SALISES St. Augustine, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and good morning, good afternoon, I think in the case of Professor Yon Diamond, but good morning to all other panelists and members of the virtual audience, perhaps some members of the virtual audience, good afternoon as well. It is indeed a pleasure to host what is deemed the 6th SALISES Virtual Forum. We have had 5 of these forums before, and SALISES, being a development studies institute, takes great pleasure in addressing development studies issues from the standpoint of the scholarly work which we seek to do at the institute. Today we are talking about statistics, and we are talking about statistics given its integral place in fostering and ensuring that development policy agendas are fulfilled, monitored, what have you. Today in particular, we are really focusing on the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, which has been a long-awaited institute in the making, and it's really intended to succeed what we refer to as the Central Statistical Office. So in Trinidad and Tobago, the Central Statistical Office was established by the Statistical Ordinance, Chapter 42, number 11 of 1952. And during the 1950s and 1960s, the Central Statistical Office was a well-respected organ of the public service championing the national development needs in that post-colonial era. Of course, there was a formidable lineup of young and middle-aged professionals who prevailed and loomed large among the early pioneers of the CSO in Trinidad and Tobago. They included the likes of Jack Harewood, demographer, statistician, Lloyd Braffett, sociologist, George Roberts, who is deemed and dubbed the father of Caribbean demography, Mervyn D'Souza, who was an actuary, Frank Rampersad, economist, Victor Bruce, who was the governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, Norma Abdullah, demographer, Irvin Chinya, who was the CSO director between 1968 and 1970. Beyond the 1960s and into the 1970s, the CSO continued to blossom under the guidance and leadership of Mr. Leo Pujadas, who was the director in the early 1970s. And in that era, the 1960s and the 1970s, the CSO in particular embarked upon a number of novel activities, including the conduct of household budgetary surveys, the continuous sample survey of the population, which provides us with labor force estimates, the survey of business establishments. And even in that period, around the mid-1970s, the CSO ventured into producing a compendium of social indicators in keeping with the social indicators movement that had been blossoming during that period. So indeed, the CSO had been a formidable organization with tremendous potential, and it was back in those days an institute that was really fit for purpose. During the early 1970s as well, the system of national accounts for Trinidad and Tobago was established in accordance with guidelines set by the United Nations Statistical Office. And that system was fully developed by Professor Carrie Levitt, who came in as a consultant and advised the CSO and helped in setting up that particular instrument. Of course, seeing the potential of the office, there was a thrust toward reorganizing, and the office was restructured in the early 1970s, around 1972. Since then, nothing major has happened. And I think, as we speak, the office, in terms of its structure today, is not far removed from what it was back in 1972. 50 years have come and gone, and nothing much has really happened. Except, of course, in 2016, when there was an attempt to establish the National Statistical Institute for Trinidad and Tobago. And I think, at that point in time, there was a great deal of hope that, finally we would take off and we would advance with an institute that is fit for purpose and ready to meet the challenges associated with an emergent data revolution, which continues to evolve. 6 years later, we are still waiting on the National Statistical Institute. And we trust that a meeting such as this one would really provide, the necessary tools and ingredients that would support efforts to really bring such an institute into fruition. So we are hoping that the 7 panelists in today's forum would address a wide range of issues that would be relevant to this call. And we really hope that, the progressive ideas that will be discussed today will be embraced by the powers that be, because we know that they have the interest of statistics and statistics for development at heart, and we really wish to be a think tank that could provide them with the necessary tools to really make this institute happen. So having said this, I just want to venture into a different dimension, and that has to do with today's forum and to whom today's forum is dedicated. SALISES has lost 2 friends in the past week. One of them was Professor Selwyn Ryan, who was the 2nd director of the Institute of Social and Economic Research, ISA, which eventually morphed into SALISES, Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies. The second was a dear friend of SALISES. His name, Mr. Sean O'Brien. And Sean O'Brien, the late Sean O'Brien, he was a former director of statistics in the CSO. He was perhaps the most fierce defender of official statistics that I know to exist on the face of the earth. And because of Sean's life and work and dedication to statistics and official statistics in Trinidad and Tobago, and his sudden death about 2 weeks ago, we decided that we will host this forum to commemorate the life and work and memory of our dear friend, the late Sean O'Brien. So before we get into the proceedings of today, I just would like to quickly read a tribute that was written in memory of Sean. And it goes like this. I met Sean O'Brien in the mid-1990s, not too long after returning to Trinidad and Tobago upon the completion of my doctoral studies. At that time, he worked in social statistics, an area that I grew to love while I was a statistician in the CSO during the early to mid 80s. I would say that my collective love for social statistics was the bond that drew Sean and me to be lifelong professional colleagues. Since then, Sean and I became sparring partners, testing one another with the aim of facilitating our own growth as statisticians and boosting our capacity to translate such growth into the advancement of statistics for development. Sean was the quintessential government statistician with a consummate knowledge of all aspects of official statistics. This becoming abundantly manifest as he grew in stature and confidence, resulting from his affable spirit and his progressive mindset. The domain of official statistics was very dear to his warm heart, but nonetheless, he demonstrated an overwhelming interest in the scientific dimension of statistics as a discipline with deep philosophical roots and would undoubtedly sustain sustainable development agendas nationally, regionally, and internationally. It was not surprising that Sean would eventually begin studies with the hope of completing doctoral studies in development policy in SALISES, UE St. Augustine. Sean progressed well with his coursework and often claimed that he grew professionally because of his short exposure as a student in SALISES. I say short exposure because his duties at the CSO often overtook his engagement with postgraduate studies and prevented him from completing his studies. So dedicated was he to his professional duties, he eventually gave more attention to ensuring that the official statistics trumped everything else in advancing progressive development agendas. His commitment to duty in the highest echelons of management and technical direction of the CSO prevented him from attaining formal credentials that would have confirmed achievements that many began to witness due to Sean's courage in public settings. Sean was among the fiercest defenders of official statistics known to humankind, and his overt wit and frankness may have annoyed many, but in my view, such characteristics were often well-placed and with a sense of purpose. Sean was a younger brother, and I grew to respect as we aged as professionals sharing interests in the advancement of statistics for development. Apart from being an alumnus, Sean was a dear friend. Oftentimes, I witnessed his benevolence towards SALISES, and Sean would move mountains to meet requests for data needs among SALISES students and academics. Sean was always motivated to move mountains as high as Everest or even higher to secure a rightful place for statistics in research and public sector policy. And sadly, he left us as we wonder where the next soldier with those attributes will come from, to serve in the battlefield to sustain and preserve the sanctity and importance of statistics in national and regional development. Sean was not only a friend and student of SALISES, He was also a respected academic colleague of SALISES. Based on my recognition of his wealth of experience and growth as a statistician, I invited him to be among the esteemed team of professionals charged with the delivery of the Master of Science in Development Statistics. He was a noteworthy asset in the delivery of SALIS 6019, which was a course in official statistics. Given his wide and varied experience, his formidable presence was also instrumental, I must say, in mentoring the next generation of professionals who have embraced aspirations of applying statistics, and in particular its principles, methodologies, and techniques to development policy agendas. Today, we are hosting the 6th SALISES virtual forum entitled National Statistics, a Culture of Best Practice, and the Establishment of the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, Imperatives for Securing National Development. Sean received his invitation the week before he died and indicated that he would have been among the virtual audience. During that telephone call, Sean and I reaffirmed our commitment to advancing and realizing the ideals of the NSITT. He offered comments about prospective panelists and content areas carded for discussion. Our dear friend and comrade transitioned unexpectedly, gone too soon. His charm, wit, expertise, and fierce protection of the statistician as a high-ranking professional practitioner will be missed. Not surprisingly, SALISES will be dedicating the 6th SALISES virtual forum to this outstanding and internationally respected public servant in the government service of Trinidad and Tobago. It is my hope that many of his questions will be asked by forum participants and answered by the panel. At the same time, we stand to miss his frank commentary with an innate knowledge of official statistics due to his earthly absence. In my own capacity, on behalf of my own family, the staff and students of SALISES Regional, and I say SALISES Regional because we also have branches in Barbados and in Jamaica, the UWI community, the members of the editorial board of the Journal of the Caribbean Association of Professional Statisticians, all the statisticians in the region, and all those who love statistics. On behalf of all of those persons, I wish to convey our deepest condolences to Ramona, his widow, his son, Jadon, and all close family members and relatives, and of course, Sean's dearest friends and colleagues. Sean was an ever-present beacon light in our lives, and his earthly passage was, without a doubt, filled with a sense of purpose that was felt by all and sundry closest to him. I want to end by saying to my little big brother, rest in eternal peace. And I say my little big brother because though Sean was younger than I, Sean had many attributes and delivered many lessons which I certainly learned from. So, as I said in the beginning, this forum is dedicated to the memory, the life and work of the late Sean O'Brien. And at this point, I'm thankful for everyone who is present, and I look forward to very progressive discussions. Thank you very much all for your attention.
And thank you, Dr. St. Bernard, for that tribute. And just to let everyone know, Sean's tribute is also on the SALISES website, as well as a tribute to Professor Selwyn Ryan. At this point in time, we'd like to just take a moment of silence to recognize the passing of two giants in within our fraternity, and just to center our thoughts on their achievements and the importance of their contributions to the field of statistics. Thank you all for respecting that moment of reverence. For today's panel, we have a number of very, very eminent and qualified contributors. And we have a bumper day, and so we want to make sure that everyone has time to speak, but we also have time for good discussion. And so we're going to, as far as possible, keep to time, and all panelists will have about 10 minutes to make their contribution. And we will be working in the background to make sure everybody is keeping within that and giving prompts as necessary. We have 7 contributors today to the panel, and I would like to introduce the first person. And as we go through, we will be giving a bio for each person as they come forward. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome the first panelist, Professor Sir Ian Diamond. Professor Sir Ian Diamond is has a fellowship of the British Academy. He was elected to the Academy of Social Sciences in 1999, is a fellow of the British Academy since 2005, a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and holds numerous honorary degrees from the universities of including Cardiff, Glasgow, and Curtin. Professor Sir Ian became the National Statistician in October of 2019. The National Statistician is the crown appointment to the authority under the Government Statistical Service of the UK. Sir Ian previously served as a non-executive member of the UK Statistics Authority Board from June 2018 to August 2019. He was the principal and vice chancellor of the University of Aberdeen from 2010 to 2018, and he was previously chief executive of the Economic and Social Research Council, and from 2004 to 2009 was the chair of the Research Councils of the UK Executive Group. So we are starting off, as they say in cricket, opening salvo. And he's going to be bringing forward to us on the topic of becoming a National Statistical Institute. What are the requirements and expectations in the context of official statistics and the thrust towards national development? I welcome Professor Sir Ian Diamond.
Thank you very much. Could I just start by saying how privileged I am to be here. When I was just finishing my PhD, I had the privilege of a very long conversation with Jack Harewood, who's been mentioned today. And also in the early 1980s, when I was teaching at the University of Southampton, Leo Puhadis, who has been mentioned today, came to Southampton for a while and actually took a course that I was teaching. I've got to tell you, it's quite unclear to me whether I learnt more from him or he learnt more from me, but we had some very, very good conversations. And so I can assure you, and what I'm going to say today, which is my own vision around what we have been together trying to do in the UK in the last couple of years around national statistics, there is an awful lot of Trinidad in what we are doing at ONS, because those conversations have had an enormous influence on my own thinking. Next slide, please. What are we trying to do? We are trying absolutely to be radical, to be ambitious, to be inclusive, and we are trying to provide data and analysis to support policy. We are independent, but at the same time, we are trying to address the big questions that our government needs. At the same time, we're trying to provide the kinds of economic and social indicators that the nation needs. I'm going to talk about innovative data, and I will mention that we still need population estimates, although having just done a very successful census in 2021, our big thinking at the moment is, do we need to do another one, or are there better ways to get that information in a more timely way? Next slide, please. So let me just push forward about, firstly, data and analysis to support policy. I'm just going to give, I could talk all day about this, but I'm just going to give, next slide, please, an example around the pandemic that sadly we have all been engaged with. In March 2020, I had a conversation with someone at the Treasury in which he said, how many people have got COVID in our country? To which the answer was, we don't know. And as a good national statistician, I said, we need a survey. We put together in 7 days a design, ethics, and got the field work going just in 7 days. And since that time, we have been running a survey. We do 150,000 PCR swabs for COVID positivity a fortnight. We also take blood from a subsample of that, and we take everybody within a household so that we can estimate within household transmission. We have a way of, we analyze these data and we produce weekly results. These weekly results are covered extensively, but importantly, they are used absolutely by the government in order to make policy. And indeed, around Christmas of 2021, sorry, as the Omicron wave kicked off and the doubling time we estimated was about 2.5 days, we moved that to twice a week. And these data have been incredibly influential. Next slide, please. Not only in enabling us to look at positivity overall and to understand the extent of asymptomatic positivity, but the way we are able to do our analysis, we can pick out very quickly the different variants of this awful virus. And so we were able very quickly to pick out the speed with which, on the left-hand side, Alpha was overtaken by Delta, and then again a bit later, Delta was overtaken by Omicron, and that enables government and the medical profession really be able to plan the way in which we are, next slide please, we are able to manage the data. But our data have to be inclusive, and I just wanted to give you this example. We looked very much, sadly, at mortality due to COVID as a result of people from different ethnic heritages. And when we looked at men from Black Caribbean heritage, initially, if the top, the lightest blue histogram there, we showed that relative to white British heritage, the overall rate of mortality was about just over twice. However, we know that men of Black Caribbean heritage in the UK are likely to come from poorer backgrounds, and we know that this is a virus which is impacted on the poorer more than the richer. So we make a control for socioeconomic status. We also control for any previous, can we go back, like any previous illness, and that is the darker blue. That reduces the risk. We then link in, so the benefits of linking data and being able to link data at speed, we link in vaccine status, and that reduces the elevated risk almost exclusively. That was incredibly important. That piece of analysis, it's quite complex multivariate analysis, incredibly important in encouraging, and we did this for other groups, encouraging the government communication people really to target the need for vaccinations in a culturally appropriate way. And I think it's incredibly important that we, as a National Statistics Institute, we're being inclusive in that way. Next slide, please. And as an example of the way in which we can link things very quickly, these are data from our most recent census just last year. We haven't even published yet the full publication answer, but we've linked those data, the occupation part of those data, again, to whether you have had the green here is 3 vaccinations, 2 vaccinations and a booster. The blue is 2 vaccinations, the orange 1 vaccination, the grey no vaccinations. And we do that for different occupations. So the top left is health professionals, the bottom, but one on the right is building trades. And you can see very clearly that the triple vaccinated are very variable by occupation. And that again enables the government to know how to target appropriately vaccination programs. Next slide, please. And finally, it's not just about the medical side, but one of the big questions about the pandemic in the UK has been around working from home and how people are feeling. So right at the beginning of the pandemic, we started an opinion survey. This is a survey that goes out to a representative sample of the population on a Wednesday. It's online. They respond. We close the survey the following Monday, publish at 4 a.m. and publish at midday. That's enabled us to have a really strong now time series. This shows you a time series over 2 years. It shows the blue is the percentage of adults who are somewhat worried about the virus, and that's largely been going down over 2 years, although there are little peaks when you get a new variant. But the green is very interesting because the percentage of adults who have worked from home, there is much question about that, and the bottom line is that that stayed fairly constant. I'm going to push at pace for the next 2 minutes. Next slide, please. We need, next slide, please, really quick public policy need. What's happened to the labour market for the pandemic? Really importantly, the top right shows the number of employees. That looks like it's gone up. Next slide, please. However, it hasn't, because actually when we look at it, the employees does not include the self-employed. So we bring in data on inactivity, and what we found in the bottom left there is actually a flight from the labour market of the over 50s. We are now doing more work to demonstrate what has happened to those over 50s. Next slide, please. And whether those over 50s could be attracted back into the labour market. You need data at pace. Next slide, please. So 2 examples. One slide, we have 95% of all credit and debit card transactions in the UK on a daily basis. I won't go through this, but the bottom line is the dark blue at the bottom is spending on social. You can see it crashes when the first lockdown started and has never quite got back up to pre-pandemic levels. On the other hand, some of the kind of turquoise green goes flat because that's spending on food and it's always been flat. We can also pick out increasingly, next slide please, the issues around gas price, and we do this on a daily basis, and you can see what has been happening to gas prices, which is driving real concerns about inflation in the UK at the moment. Doing this on a daily basis gets government in an innovative way the information they need. Next slide, please. And then we also clearly have done a census. Next slide, please. This census was the most successful we've ever done, with a response rate over 97%. We're just fine-tuning under enumeration, but the critical way we did that was absolutely to engage with different communities in a way which said to them, look, we need your data, but we're not going away. We will be back soon after the data, after the census, to engage with you. So currently we are engaging with different communities, showing how their results matter. Next slide, please. And the future, next slide, please. Indeed, last slide is just simply to say, how are we going to work as a National Statistics Institute? We are the servants of every citizen in our country, and we need to be ambitious about giving answers to the critical questions they need, as well as being radical in data, inclusive in the way we do things and always be sustainable. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. I really have valued the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Ian. I don't know about you, but not often do you hear words like radical and ambitious associated to statistics. But for those of us who love this field, we know that it really does require that type of mentality. A note that you said, data at pace. So when we're talking now about a statistical system, I heard very clearly this idea that given where we are in time and space, we don't need yesterday's data. We need data that reflects our present conditions. And I think your presentation of the COVID situation and what the UK is doing in terms of looking at how frequently they can provide data to every person on the street, that is exceptionally wonderful. And it's really a system we can be looking at to say, okay, what can we learn from? What can we adopt? Thank you so much, Sir Ian, for opening up the conversation. So I want to invite everyone to just know that the agenda for today is actually in the chat. It is a file that says SALISES webinar and program. And what we're doing right now is we're going through with all of the presentations. All of the panelists will have 10 minutes and they'll make their presentation. But we want to get to the good part, and the good part is the discussion. So we're going to keep things as tight as possible and move forward. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Abdullahi Al-Gadari to make his presentation. Dr. Al-Gadari is the coordinator of statistics and social development unit at the UN ECLAC, at the sub-regional headquarters in the Caribbean in Trinidad and Tobago. And he leads the Regional Commission's technical assistance to the Caribbean countries on statistical capacity building, including the establishment of national statistical systems and the implementation, follow-up, and review of the 2020 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the SDGs, that's the Sustainable Development Goals. Prior to joining the ECLAC, Professor Al-Gadari was a professor of applied economics at the University of the West Indies Mona campus, where he served as the Associate Dean for Research and Innovation in the Faculty of Social Sciences. He has conducted studies on the use of big data for social statistics and recently completed a review of statistical legislation of Caribbean countries. So I want to welcome Dr. Al-Gadari to the fore, and he will be making his presentation on best practice and integrity in the national statistical systems, the significance of international and regional mandates for the Caribbean. Doctor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me bring up my presentation here. Can you see my presentation in presentation mode? Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Bessie Downs. It's really a pleasure to be on this panel this morning, and thank you, SALISES, for this invitation, Dr. Simbernard. Before I go into my presentation, I would actually like to also commiserate with SALISES and the CSO, the Central Statistical Office, on the passing of Mr. Sean O'Brien. Sean, and also to send our condolences on behalf of ECLAC and myself to his family, friends, and colleagues. I work with Sean very closely, and I can attest to everything that Dr. Simbernard said, although I don't know him as much as he did. Sean was a gentle giant, and apart from his wealth of knowledge, his interest in statistics, in official statistics, Sean has a mischievous sense of humor that you cannot miss, and it keeps us all lively whenever we have meetings of statisticians where, as you might imagine, it could really get quite boring. at times. But Sean will be really missed, and I'm glad that I worked with him in the transition, or we are still in that process, as Godfrey mentioned, of the transition of the CSO to the NSITT, and he worked tirelessly. And hopefully that transition will happen, and it will be a great commemoration of the work that he did and his memory. Yes, so what I would like to do is to make a very quick overview of what official statistics is. Of what a national statistical system is, and I'm getting into some of the presentation that others might be making later on. I know that we will be making reference to the NSS, the National Statistical System, and just a very brief overview of what that means. It's typically a collection of entities within a country, and those entities are tasked or involved in activities that have to do with the collation, processing, dissemination of official statistics. And the National Statistical Office, in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, that will be the Central Statistical Office, will generally be the coordinating agency for the NSS. And the NSS could be structured in different ways. You could have a very centralized structure, which will mean you have a single institution that is regarded as the NSO and pretty much occupy a central position in the NSS. A very good example of that will be Canada, where we have Statistics Canada that does pretty much everything in official statistics. And a decentralized system where you have multiple agencies or institutions that are responsible for national statistical work, official statistics. And a very good example of that will be the United States, where you have several agencies, the US Bureau of Census with population work or demographic work. You have the Bureau of Labor Statistics, you have the Department of Commerce, the Department of Agriculture, you have the Feds. So you have several agencies that have peculiar and very specific mandates in different areas of statistics. Now, for most countries, especially in the Caribbean, what we have will be a system that is somewhere in between these structures. And so you could have something that is more centralized or more decentralized, or not fully centralized or fully decentralized. And each of these will have its different advantages and disadvantages. If you have a centralized system, it becomes more effective. You have the name recognition. Everybody knows Stats Canada. Everybody knows the statistics, Australia, the statistics bureau. So you have that advantage, and then you have a decentralized, and the disadvantage would be there may be a problem of if you have a leadership failure, because you have just one agency, then that could spell a very it could mean problem for national statistics production and dissemination. And for the decentralized system, then of course the coordination becomes a challenge, because there are several agencies that are responsible for production and dissemination of official statistics. But on the other hand, you have these, they are able to build expertise, specific expertise in the different areas of statistics that they are involved in. In the case of Trinidad and Tobago, we could cite that the CSO, the central bank, different ministries and departments, and the TNT will form this NSS. By law, the NSS will be centralized if you look at the Statistics Act. But in practice, the NSS really does not exist because it has not been formalized, although it may exist informally, and then tends to operate in a very decentralized structure. If you look at the section 4(1)(c) of the Statistics Act, it states that the statistician shall collaborate with other government departments in the collection, compilation, analysis, publication of statistical records of administration. That's only collaboration. It doesn't specify coordinating role for the CSO. So that tends to limit the coordinating ability of the CSO with respect to the NSS. But if we look more broadly, the international, regional, and sub-regional mandates and guidelines that exist for official statistics, we can cite the UN Fundamental Principles of Official Statistics and the Handbook of Statistical Organizations. Within the Latin America and the Caribbean region, there is the Statistical Conference of the Americas, which ECLAC serves as the secretariat for. And they have produced a code of good practice in statistics for Latin America and the Caribbean countries. And for the Caribbean, we have the Statistics Code of Practice, the model statistics model bill, and the regional strategy for the development of statistics. I might add as well that the Statistics Code of Practice for CARICOM countries actually predates the regional code of good practice for Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, there are 10 principles, which if you are a National Statistical Office or a member of the NSS, you are expected to abide by, to at least live by these 10 principles, which have been extensively studied, reviewed, and implemented, and proven to be quite necessary for there to be a national statistical system that has a high integrity and that is able to perform its functions in the production of official statistics. Principle one is that the statistics that you are producing have to be relevant, they have to have impartiality, and there should be equal access to what is being produced. Professional standards have to be maintained, including statistical scientific principles and professional ethics. Accountability and transparency, prevention of misuse. You have to address the sources of official statistics, which, given the very in the recent few years, because maybe in the current since the last decade, because of the wide development or the advancement in technology, where we have computing capacity with big data, we have open data, and all these will have to now be considered in the context of official statistics. And the UNST, the United Nations Statistics Division, is very much on board and looking into all of this. Confidentiality, legislation, national coordination, the use of international standards for there to be comparability, and of course the quality assurance, and then international cooperation. So these principles provide the basis for the production of official statistics and the operation of the national statistical system in any country. Now, coming from the international level, also we have the Handbook of Statistical Organization, which has a chapter that addresses the national statistical system. And that chapter has a number of guidelines, which include how to structure the system, the NSS, the kind of coordination tools that the NSS will require in being quite effective, who the national statistician should be, the kind of qualification of qualities that you want in a national statistician, their functioning, and the council, as well as the law and the financing of the statistical system. Now, at the regional level, we have the Code of Good Practice in Statistics for Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm not going to go into detail of it because they are quite similar to the Code of Practice in CARICOM as well. But I want to focus on I want to highlight the number one, which is professional independence. And with the CARICOM Statistics Code of Practice, again, you have professional independence as number one, and the mandate for data collection, the accuracy of the adequacy of resources, and so on and so forth. At the regional level, at the Latin American and Caribbean, we have 17 of those, and at the CARICOM level, 15, but a lot of overlap. And in addition to that, the CARICOM, at the regional level, there is a regional strategy for the development of statistics, which has as a main outcome to have national, regional, and global development agenda, enabling a resilient community with sustained economic and growth and development. And of course, you need data for development. And there are 5 strategies, strategic priorities within that RSDS, which I won't go into. But what I want to focus on before I conclude is that looking at all these guidelines, we did at ECLAC, we did a review of the legislation, Statistical Act, and ordinances in the Caribbean against the fundamental principles of fair statistics. And we noticed that principles 3 and 4 in particular are not well incorporated into statistics legislation. And I'll get into that a little later, but focusing on Trinidad and Tobago, we have the current act, which is still the law, and the NSITT bill of 2018, which, like mentioned, we've done quite a lot of work to try and see, to make sure that these actually present a very good model in the Caribbean. If you look at how they perform against the UNFPOS, the 1982 Act wasn't really a very good one, but the current bill is very good, at least when you look at the Caribbean level. But what we notice is that for principle 4, the prevention of misuse of data is still not incorporated in that bill. So that provides something for us to think about as this bill is being introduced. So as a takeaway, what I want to highlight is that we have international and regional mandates and guidelines that are quite effective in helping us to have a sound NSS. But in the Caribbean, what we've noticed is that in law, and of course, there will be some elements in practice as well. If it's not in law, it doesn't mean that it's not being followed, but that means that it's subject to the generosity, if I may say, of the leader of the National Statistical Institute for these principles to be really enforced. Prevention of misuse of data. It's not very well reflected in law. Accountability and transparency, not very well reflected in law, and the use of international standards, just to mention the top 3. And these best practices that are ingrained in the principles and the guidelines that I've highlighted provide a way for us to see how new generation of statistical legislation in the Caribbean could ensure the integrity of official statistics, so that we can all be proud to present data as Professor Diamond just did, coming from the Caribbean as well. Thank you, and apology for the slide not coming the way it should. Over to you, Valentin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullahi. We know that there's a lot of information packed into all that you've presented, particularly some of the things that you spoke about in terms of national coordination. I saw that as one of the fundamental principles and the importance of that, and the way in which all subject matter experts, persons from different fields, are all a part of what we understand as the decentralized national statistical system as we gather information for development. So thank you for that intervention, and also particularly point about the independence of a National Statistical Institute. Good food for thought as we carry on the conversation. I would like to welcome Mr. Lance Busby. He can begin to set up as I provide a background to his presentation. So we're going to invite Mr. Lance Busby to be our next presenter. He has been a foremost Caribbean statistician for more than 40 years. So again, a lot of expertise here for us today. At the Central Statistical Office of Trinidad and Tobago, he was a statistician, rising to the level of senior statistician, and contributed in the area of economic statistics, heading the National Accounts and Business Surveying Units, inaugurating several indices, number series, and other socioeconomic indicators, including the publication of economics indicators. If you all know that publication that used to come out of the CSO. One of his most used works was the methodology for the imputation for non-response in business surveys. Mr. Busby left the service of the government of Trinidad and Tobago for a position of statistician at the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, where he covered development of statistics in the Caribbean countries that were members of the CARICOM group, as well as a number of non-Caribbean countries that are members of the Commission. He's a graduate of the UE and the Inter-American Center for Teaching of Statistics and Brunel University. He's been an international consultant since 2004 and devoting his energies to strategic planning, national information systems, project evaluation, natural disaster damage assessment, including post-damage needs assessments, and the modernization of national statistical and information systems, and preparation for the national MDG reports at that time. Mr. Busby functions in 3 languages, so he's a true polyglot, so to speak. So we welcome Mr. Lance Busby to make his presentation, and he will be presenting on governance processes, the proposed NSITT and the National Statistical System, challenges and remedies in response to a global data revolution.
Yeah, thank you very much. Am I being heard?
Loud and clear. Loud and clear.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I will try to stay faithful to my terms of reference. But before doing so, I wish to say good day to all participants and, of course, members of the panel. In the 10 minutes of speaking time, I will try to maximize these 10 minutes by not presenting a PowerPoint presentation. Otherwise, I would tend to go on and on. As the previous speakers have said, we can speak for weeks about this topic. So I shall apply the criteria of governance, which means good governance, to what I see as emerging from the proposed National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, and examine it for the fit to the proposed institution and national statistical system of Trinidad and Tobago. After my intervention, the chair will moderate a discussion on the topic later on. Good governance addresses structures, systems, and practices that an organization counts on to effect decision-making, the delivery of services. Hello?
Sorry to do this to you, Mr. Busby. Is it possible for you to lower your camera just slightly?
Okay, fair enough. I tried it just now.
There you go. Because
Okay,
we want to see all of our statisticians' faces. Carry on.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I was saying that good governance addresses the structures of services, delivery of services, oversight of the delivery of services, the implementation of its policies, plans, programs, and projects, the monitoring and mitigation of its key risks, and an evaluation of the reporting on its performance over a period of time, which suggests a very vibrant organization. It can never be, not for 3 days running, business as per the previous day. There's always something very dynamic that has to be addressed and has to be fine-tuned. We may wish to suggest 4 approaches towards the determination of high-quality governance. One would be procedural measures, such as the Weberian, coming from Max Weber, criteria of bureaucratic modernity. The organization must be governed by rules in order to be effective. It must have a hierarchical structure. Secondly, capacity measures, which include both resources and degree of professionalization. Thirdly, there must be some assessment of output measures and measures of bureaucratic autonomy. Keyword being autonomy. Of course, autonomy does not imply the free and willy-nilly capability and permission to do what suddenly occurs to the head of the institution. at any given time. Autonomy is controlled. We can look at the five basic principles of good governance to be accountability, leadership, integrity, stewardship, and transparency. Some of these have been touched on by my predecessor speaker, to whom I would like to congratulate on his apt and correct evaluation of the situation in the Caribbean. My task today is just looking at Trinidad and Tobago to the extent that I would remain relevant. So prior to the establishment of the task force, the Central Statistical Office, starting in 1952, recognized the existence of other data producing agencies that would form a national statistical system. This system was notional. It had never been fully conceptualized and formally established up to today. There existed more a recognition of the need for a system than an actual system. There are threats that I can identify and place before this group for consideration and perhaps further discussion as we go along. Certainly, I don't want to preempt every single point. The act that governs the operation of the CSO has its origin in the 1952 Act, upgraded in 1972, as Dr. St. Bernard has said. I want us to note that in 2014, the UN General Assembly noted that professional independence and accountability of statistical agencies are crucial. But at present, the CSO operates under the central government, that is, as an ordinary civil service department under a permanent secretary who's under a minister. The current reporting structure does not allow for the coordination of the national statistical system as advocated by Principle 8 in the fundamental principles of official statistics. I won't read the principles. I think my previous speaker had put them up. Many statistical satellite agencies do not adhere to international statistical standards as advocated by Principle 9. In many cases, the heads of these satellite organizations came from the middle order of the statistical office. The bright statistical officers went off incomplete training, not to detract from their abilities and interests at all, but the fact is that they were pulled off the production, the training line to head these statistical satellite agencies, so that they were not fully kept up to date with improvements in training and directions in statistics. So we had the task force established in 2016. The result was a bill, a proposed bill that has yet to see implementation. And on this, I'd want to make a few comments. I see in the bill a number of challenges to be faced by the NSITT, the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago, and the National Statistical System. Looking at the bill, the objectives of bureaucratic autonomy are fully mapped onto the modernization of the present CSO. As my previous speaker says, modernization can take one of a series of different styles and intensities. Okay, the one that we seem to have opted for in Trinidad was like an executive agency, which is a halfway house between what CSO is now and what we really, since 1989, would have liked to see as being an autonomous, vibrant, and a very professional organization leading the collection, the determination, and the relevance of statistics produced for national development. The NSITT is charged with being the center of the system, but the system is not in existence because any system has to be coordinated. The arms must obey a central nervous system, and so too must the legs, and they must go in coordination. It is not possible to have a system where there's total autonomy and total answerability to a ministerial head whose interest does not at all times fully jive with the interest of national statistics. In other words, Ministry of X, I don't want to call a ministry, will have to obey the permanent secretary and the minister's primary objectives, leaving whatever little leisure time there is to cooperate and coordinate into a system. It cannot work like that. The system has to be tight. It has to have leadership, and leadership with authority and accountability, which I do not believe the present act caters for. The present bill. A number of things. The functions of the NSITT board. Clause 9 of the bill outlines the functions of the board, and the board should be responsible for a number of things that are normal, you know, the approving and ensuring the implementation of management policies. I won't go through all of these. Many of these are expected and the normal functions of a board.
Mr. Busby, you have 1 moment.
Okay, fair enough. In response to global data revolution, okay, fair enough. Sorry about that. The question of our big data, and well, again, that was dealt with before. We would have, the board, the NSIT will have to look carefully at the type of progress and forward movement in terms of the requirements of the new data revolution and the suitability of its resources to supply these. My final thoughts on the approaches to the assessment of the quality of good governance is that we may wish to look at the 4 approaches, which is procedural measures, the capacity measures, output measures, measures of bureaucratic autonomy, and equip the NSITT and the system with these capabilities to improve statistics for development in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much. I will have to stop at this point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Busby. I think within the context of the conversation, we're hearing a couple very important themes: coordination, legislation, a sense of autonomy and independence. And thank you so much for really explaining what that independence could look like in a practical sense. I want to encourage everyone, if you have questions, you feel free to put them in the chat as we go on. We know you may be thinking about things. And so as we make our way to the panel discussion, we want to have the questions already prepared for the panelists. Maybe it's something they have to think on. And any resources as well, we will put in the chat with reference to what our panelists are discussing. Now I would like to invite the acting director of the SALISES St. Augustine to make his presentation on countering the devaluation of statistics for development and promoting a modern statistics culture through institutional strengthening. Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard is the acting director, as I said, of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute. at St. Augustine. Between 1980, he worked as a statistician in the Central Statistical Office in Trinidad and Tobago and was responsible for the production of social and vital statistics published by the CSO. His current academic interests include problems akin to population and development, applied statistical analysis, research methodology, evaluation research, and social policy. His current research interests focus on children and youth, population policy and dynamics in the Caribbean, violence prevention and safety promotion, vulnerability and resilience in small states, return migration and the measurement of social phenomena. Dr. St. Bernard has authored numerous scholarly studies that have appeared in peer-reviewed journals, chapters in edited books, and other academic and scholarly media. He's been an author of technical papers for several international organizations. Currently, he leads 2 international projects, the Rights of Children and Youth Partnership Project funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, Canada, and the Computation of Comprehensive Wealth for Trinidad and Tobago, funded by the International Institute for Sustainable Development. Dr. St. Bernard continues to coordinate the MSc in Development Statistics offered by SALISES, a program that he pioneered in 2008. His early days as a young statistician in the CSO impressed upon him the need to develop homegrown expertise in statistical skills to inform development policy to the extent that he vowed to champion and establish such a program within a formal institutional setting. So we welcome Dr. St. Bernard to make his presentation.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues and delegates in the virtual audience. And it is indeed my pleasure to make a few statements. I'll speak from the heart, speak from the mind, more so than anything else. And I want to thank the chair for her introduction. I want to start by thinking about, individuals, individual persons and their concern about their health. And when we think of individuals and their concern about their health, the first thing they look toward is the number. What are the numbers saying? And where do they get those numbers from? They go to medical laboratories to do all kinds of tests. What is interesting about individuals and human populations is that there is a lifespan of, let's say, 100+ years. I don't know of any human being who has lived for 200 years. But within that lifespan, of course, there is a degradation of the physiological being, and one needs to know, well, what's happening as I go along? Am I doing well? You go to the lab, you get your test done. Whether it is you're interested in liver function or kidney function, your endocrine system, your circulatory system, there are various tests that you would do to get your blood glucose, your diastolic and systolic measures, and so on. What is characteristic about all these laboratories you go to is that there are instruments, and the instruments have to produce pretty precise, or better yet, accurate assessments of those numbers to tell you about the state of your health. And I want to move straight on to our nations. And just as we are interested in our personal health, we also think that, our nations and the health of our nations, right, has to be monitored. And just as the human body is made up of a number of different systems with organs operating within those systems, I am quite sure that, when we think of our nations are made up of systems with organs within each of those systems. And we want to know something about the economy. We want to know something about social structure, population structure. We want to know something about the environment, and we need the numbers. And where do we get the numbers from? In that case, the laboratory is the National Statistical Office and the wider national statistical system. And just as we need our medical laboratories to have instruments that are well calibrated and well monitored to ensure that they provide reliable and valid indicators of what's going on in our human bodies, we need the same kind of instruments within the national statistical offices and the national statistical systems to inform and to provide the numbers that we need for our nations and the different parts of the nations that we talk about, whether we're looking at different subpopulations, communities, what have you. So definitely what I am saying is that the National Statistical Office is critically important. And if it is that we are talking about these numbers and obtaining numbers that are of high quality in terms of their validity, we have to be concerned about, the produced capital. We have to be concerned about the produced capital and the human capital that exists in these entities. Someone has to invest in these different forms of capital. And insofar as someone has to invest in these forms of capital, when I talk about produced capital, I'm talking about the equipment that exists. I'm talking about the tools that are available for the workers within statistical offices to do their jobs. When I talk about the human capital, I'm talking specifically about the groups of workers who occupy and produce the data. But it's not just only, the tools and the groups of workers that we are concerned about, We are really concerned about, also a number of other issues that have been discussed by my predecessors in terms of, the legislative arrangements and the international declarations that hold things together. And I'm speaking to all of this because oftentimes, we listen to, results presented by national statistical offices, and people who know nothing about official statistics are quick to jump to the conclusion that, hey, I don't buy that. And there's no ground for what they're saying. It's not grounded in anything of substance. But I'd like to say that when we think in terms of the work of a National Statistical Office and even what goes on in the national statistical system, that ought to be directed in many ways and advised from the National Statistical Office, that, we are obeying and we are being guided by international standards. And when we think in terms of the fundamental principles of official statistics, there are some principles that, relate to, national coordination, and there are other principles that reflect in many ways the use of international standards among others, right? These are critical principles. But by and large, in terms of the validity and the accountability, one of the fundamental principles of official statistics speaks to accountability and transparency. And what that is really saying is that, in the context of national statistical offices, they ought to, first of all, be such that they do facilitate, correct interpretation of whatever data are produced. And not only that, I think it is important that they present information that is in keeping with rigid scientific standards and linked to sources and methods and procedures that are deemed to be sound in keeping with international standards, as the case may be. So having said all of that, you know, I'm thinking that, you know, when we think of an office such as the CSO in Trinidad and Tobago, in my earlier statements, I made reference to the fact that it was fit for purpose back in the 1950s, 1960s, even up until about the 1970s. But somewhere along the line, you know, I think things have sort of gone awry, and it is not really the fault of the CSO that, you know, things have gone awry. I worked at the Central Statistical Office, and I remember, you know, specifically the reverence that was placed on training statisticians. And every year, some statistician from the CSO, if you did not go to the International Program Center in Washington, DC to be trained, or the Munich Center in Munich, Germany to be trained, many others were involved in other training options, even within the context of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where there were several statistics courses being offered, right? I'm not sure that, you know, much of that prevails anymore, but one of the things one of the important issues I'm getting at is the importance of training to really emphasize, you know, the quality dimensions of the work of statisticians, and in particular, you know, how that dovetails into producing higher quality data, as I would speak to in a short while, because I think for this to happen, it's not just having a National Statistical Office that only produces national statistics, but having a National Statistical Office that assumes the role of a National Statistics Institute. And insofar as it assumes the role of a National Statistical Institute, it has the capacity to engage in research. And when I say research, research that is methodological in nature. In other words, research into methodology, the study of method as it relates to, you know, the operations within the statistical office. And not only that, you know, the operations within the National Statistical Office, if it is to keep moving in tandem with the data revolution and the speed at which the data revolution is evolving, we have to have that mechanism within the National Statistical Office that can engage in cutting edge research and decide and make decisions and provide advice in terms of, you know, how we can, you know, reorganize the tools of the trade, the tools that I spoke of to really ensure that, you know, we produce quality, and not just produce quality, because another critical dimension of statistics is, you know, being able to produce statistics on a timely basis. How could we produce, you know, high quality data on a timely basis? So I am, in the interest of time, you know, I have been thinking long and hard about, you know, what prevails in the National Statistical Office today, in the CSO. And as I said in my earlier remarks, I do not think it is far removed, if removed at all, from what prevailed back in 1972. And the CSO is primarily an organization that is producing statistics for the consumption of a wider public, which is in keeping with its mandate. But I am saying that, you know, the CSO ought to evolve into a National Statistical Institute that takes on board a whole range of new skills. And I'm talking about, you know, skills of involving professionals who are, like, for example, project management specialists. We have to ensure that, you know, the projects that we embark upon to produce the various kinds of statistics, using the various approaches to producing those statistics, are done in keeping with a calendar, and that the timeliness is observed, not to mention, of course, the quality dimensions. We need econometricians, demographers, social statisticians. We need biostatisticians, data science experts. economic statisticians, which would include, statisticians who are knowledgeable of the various dimensions and dynamics associated with national accounts. We need to have survey sampling specialists, GIS specialists, and of course, we need to have media specialists, because at the end of the day, these are the kinds of, the kinds of expertise that are required in modern statistical environments. Particularly when I talk about the media specialists, we need to have persons who can provide a basis to facilitate how do we communicate the statistical products and the deliverables from the National Statistical Office in meeting with the needs of the public. How do we, ensure that our publics and our various users are more, how can I put it, statistically literate? We need people who can be that bridge between the technical arm and the lay person who is out there and who has the communication skills and the language skills to make it happen. Also, I am talking about these kinds of positions and professional areas of expertise, because at the end of the day, what we really need is, I would say, is a research arm where these are the people who would be at the cutting edge and keeping abreast of developments that are taking place internationally within the international statistics arena, and bringing it to the local setting and really seeing at the end of the day how we can make ends meet. And I dare say all of this is important because when we think of the recent episodes regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that we have to conduct a national census, are we really on track with respect to, business as usual, or are we adopting, new methodologies that are in keeping with some of the limitations that might be posed due to the COVID-19 pandemic? So there's much more that I could say, but at this point in time, I think I want to stop here in the interest of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, Dr. St. Bernard. You started off by saying, we need the numbers. I got that specifically as a quote out of your presentation. And the discussion ending with this issue of data visualization. Now, so much of our world is a world in which we are consuming a lot more visual media. And what does it mean for us as statisticians and people who require data for decision making to function within our context in which people need to see the data almost constantly? It needs to be accessible very readily. I want to turn your attention to the chat. There's some very good questions in the chat that have been posed, but I also want to highlight that our next speaker actually has put some resources in the chat if you are at all interested in the legislative components related to statistics and statistical institutes. So there are also some good resources in the chat, and it's lovely to see the discussion kind of happening on its own in parallel with the discussion. Thank you, Dr. St. Bernard. I want to welcome Mr. Gabriel Gamez to the fore, and he is going to be making his presentation on national statistics systems in the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Mr. Gamez, he is the inter-regional advisor on organization and management of the National Statistical Systems at the United Nations Statistics Division in New York since 2015. Is responsible for implementing and monitoring various global initiatives and programs to modernize national statistical systems, institutional framework, and governance mechanisms supporting the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and other international and national development policies. He began his professional career at the Swiss Federal Statistical Office in 1992 and was appointed in 2004 Chief Statistician of the European Free Trade Association. From 2010 to 2015, he served as Regional Advisor in Statistics at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe in Geneva. Mr. Gamez holds degrees in social science and economics, and he is a postgraduate in statistics from the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland. welcome. And I know we're looking forward to your presentation, Mr. Gamez. Go right ahead. I believe you're muted.
Yes, I am. I was. It takes a bit of time actually when I press on the thing. Thank you very much. You have probably my screen here, and now I will move to a PowerPoint presentation. Do you have it there? Let me know if you see it. Okay, excellent. Now you are muted. So thank you very much, Madam Moderator, Madam Chair, for this introduction. Actually, I could have hold my my presentation at the beginning because it's a kind of an introduction, but maybe it's not really a conclusion. But I bring a couple of pieces that were presented today together. The first thing I wanted to say is that nowadays, and especially with the COVID-19, but also the SDG indicators, we have heard a lot of people speaking about data. And it's true that we are in front of a big wave of data, right? What we call the big data, but there are also other kind of data. And we know that more than 90% of the data in the world today available have been created these last 2 years, right? It's phenomenal. And sometimes we get the question, but why do we need a statistical institute? We have the data, they're there, they're so easy to collect. But the problem is that data is raw information. Data often does not speak to most of the users. Maybe some specialists can understand them, but they need to be transformed and converted into knowledge so that data eventually at the end of this conversion process is becoming audible and useful for the users. And this is something that is important, and this science is called statistics. Sometimes I think we could also call it data science because statistics is a branch of data science. But I mean, if I go to the next one just for an illustration, you have on your left side the different sources of energy or data if you want. But this is all high voltage. Users can't do anything if they want to charge their laptop. What we need is a transformer, something that transforms high density, high voltage information into something that is useful for the users. And this is the role of us statisticians. I say us because I consider myself as a statistician, as you mentioned that in the introduction. Now, the thing, just also to be a bit clear, and this maybe in some of the presentation I felt that needed maybe to be specified here, is that in every country we have the data ecosystem. We call it the data ecosystem or the data system. This is actually the entire system, if there is a system, of producers, users, not only of statistics, but of data. And at the core of this data ecosystem, you have the National Statistical Office or the National Statistical Institute in your case, which is the main producer of official statistics. And we will hear more about what is official statistics, even though I will be short because it was already done. We have a few, in general, not too many, other producers of official statistics. And then we have other data holders and providers like the administration, but also the private sector, the citizens, etc. So this is something that is important. The data ecosystem is actually extremely large and wide, but the national statistical system is actually composed, and I go now actually to the next one already, is actually composed of two main groups of producers. One is the National Statistical Institute, and I'm not going to discuss too much about that because it was presented. And depending on the country, and we heard a little bit about the differences between the National Statistical System of our colleagues in Canada and in Great Britain and so on, you have, of course, statistical system where there are a lot of other producers of official statistics and other systems that are rather concentrated with only a few other producers of official statistics, or sometimes even no other producers of official statistics than the National Statistical Institute. So now, what's defined these producers of national statistics, official statistics? Sorry. So basically, what actually identify or qualify the National Statistical Office and the other producers? The first thing is that official statistics has a set of values, right? One is that statistics is universal. It's universal because the entities producing official statistics don't produce statistics for themselves. They produce statistics for the others. And that's why we can be independent. If we produce statistics for us and eventually share with others, people can question our independence, saying they have two hats. They are the policymakers, and at the same time, they are producing the statistics to justify their policies, right? And to monitor their policies and evaluate their policies. That's why official statistics, and in particular the Statistical Institute, is extremely important because it's universal, produce relevant statistics, so basically for the users in the country, is independent, professional, resilient, and we saw that with the COVID-19, it was very important, confidential, because we try to protect also the data providers. It's not only to protect the users, we need to protect the data providers, and accountable. Of course, we have heard already how important the UN fundamental principles of official statistics that actually translate these values into a set of 10 principles. We have the regional statistics code of practice. You have the link in my slide on the one that applies to the CARICOMs or the region, the Caribbean countries. We have also the UN National Quality Assurance Framework, a new one that was endorsed, that is very important when we think how we can structure a national statistical system and what could be the role of the National Statistical Institute. We have national statistical legislation, and I mentioned in the chat actually the excellent generic statistical law that was developed jointly by the Inter-American Development Bank and ECLAC, that our colleagues in Santiago de Chile, that would help, that is there to help countries to develop their national legislation on statistics to make the statistical system resilient and agile. And of course, the set of international guidelines, methodology, and nomenclature. Now, some people were saying a while ago that, oh yeah, maybe this organization of national statistical system with a broader national data system or data ecosystem is maybe a little bit outdated. Why do we need people working according to these strict values, right? Our days when we are, again, in this context of big data, everybody has data, we don't need a National Statistics Institute. But the GA, the General Assembly, in its resolution on the SDG indicator, the General Assembly is the highest political body in the world. It's not a resolution from a statistician. It's a resolution of the United Nations to a statistician, which says that official statistics should be the basis for the SDG indicator framework. They mention again the importance of the fundamental principles of official statistics. They mentioned that national statistical institutes in each country should be the coordinators of the national statistical systems, but of course, also invite us, official statisticians, to think about how we could integrate new data sources. And we had excellent presentations on big data, administrative data. So that's why this concept of data system is also important, and not only the national statistical system, and acknowledge the Cape Town Global Action Plan, which is actually a document that articulates how we can promote and support countries in the transformation of their national statistical system. Closer to us, actually, in the context of the COVID, there was a call of the 75th session of the General Assembly. The General Assembly requested from the member states, so again from us and basically from us statisticians, to improve the resilience and agility of national statistical systems to meet COVID-19 data needs to recover better, number one, but also to build inclusive and integrated data and statistical systems. And this is now important, under the leadership of National Statistical Institute, to respond to the increased and urgent data demands in times of disaster, and not only, I mean, sanitary disasters, but other kind of disasters that can happen, right? Unfortunately, and at the same time, ensure a path towards the achievement of the 2030 agenda. We can see here that there is definitely a pledge, a request from the General Assembly that national statisticians should definitely transform the system in order for this system to be able to address the needs of our users, and not only the needs that we have identified again years ago, but these ones that can emerge from critical situation like the COVID-19, but also any other, for example, natural disaster. Here I have a few points about it. Was explain what are the advantages of sound governance and coordination, of course, efficiency, synergies, effectiveness, but also quality, coherence, comparability, and accessibility. And eventually to secure, and it's an important one, trust in data and statistics, right? And develop a corporate identity within a country from statistics, official statistics, eventually also for the data. Now, my last one, and this is maybe a little bit provocative. If the national data ecosystem or the national data system was an iceberg, the visible part, the 10%, would be the SDG indicators. As you know that when a piece of ice is in the water, 10% is outside. This is what is extremely visible, and we have to work on that. For once in the history of statistics, official statistics, there is a strong attention from our users to produce the SDG indicators, right? This is a fantastic opportunity. Now, we have two ways of doing that. The first one would be to add ice on the top of the iceberg. And what would happen? The iceberg would sink a little bit. That doesn't help very much, right? Now, the other way of helping is actually in increasing the statistical infrastructure, the capacity, the competence, the human resources, the technology, all these infrastructure that is under the water. And by making this bigger, with the right organization of the National Statistical System, with a strong National Statistical Institute, right? Working and using administrative records, private third-party data, big data, but also what we hear nowadays, citizen-generated data. By making this part bigger, we would push the SDG indicators up and make them even more important, more visible, of higher quality, disaggregated, and useful for the entire community in the country, but also at the international level. With that, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention.
Wow. So we have a lot of food for thought and an excellent metaphor to work with, the iceberg. Are we going to be pushing it up, or are we going to be sinking it down? How are we going to transform our capacity to be able to meet the standards of the SDGs? As many of you all know, we have a lot of SDG indicators that we're supposed to be able to report on. But how do we get to that place, and how do we possibly do better? Look at what's indigenously important to us. All of those are major questions. Thank you, Mr. Gamez, for really stirring up the potential as to what could happen with that excellent, excellent metaphor. I think Desmond Perry might be extremely excited now to jump into the conversation because of how this would relate to him. And so I would like to welcome Desmond Perry to make his presentation. He is from the Tobago House of Assembly, and his presentation is going to be on Statistics for Development, NSITT, the Tobago House of Assembly, and the human and institutional needs of Tobago in the 2020s and beyond. For those of you who do not know Desmond Perry, he is the statistician within the Office of the Chief Secretary over at the THA, that's the Tobago House of Assembly, since 2009. Prior to this, his position was a systems analyst / programmer with the Policy Research and Development Institute since 1998. Mr. Perry has worked on several Tobago-specific research projects, so we cannot be said we have left out our sister island in this conversation, including the Tobago Development Plan, review of the Tobago economy and policy measures, Tobago business registers, a feasibility study for an indoor sports facility in Tobago, and a survey of living conditions of the elderly and disabled persons in Tobago. He also has derived both annual and quarterly gross domestic product, the GDP for Tobago from 1997 to 2004. So you could thank him for that information at the PRDI. At present, Desmond has managed and maintained a complete data set of all positive COVID-19 cases. Thank you for your work. Analyzed COVID-19 data sets for the CMOH office and conducted vaccination hesitancy surveys among different sectors, including all divisions of the THA. Desmond was educated at the UE St. Augustine, where he gained his BSc in Mathematics and Computer Sciences and an MPhil in Statistics. His thesis topic, statistical methodology for deriving the GDP estimates for the island region of Tobago in 1997 and 2004. I think for us who like to read theses, that sounds like a wonderful thing to read. So I want to welcome Desmond to make his presentation and to truly rep our sister isle today. Desmond, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all the panelists and attendees. Today, I am going to deliver a presentation on the statistics for development, the NSITT, the THA, and the human and institutional needs of Tobago in 2020s and beyond. The structure of my presentation is as follows. I will talk about national statistics first, and then the Tobago need for official statistics, which is an important need, and then the collaboration that needs to exist between the CSO and the THA, then a capacity building project that needs to be undertaken, and then the transition from the CSO to the NSITT in Tobago. So I'll start here. In 2016, we are all aware that a task force was set up to prepare a report to inform the establishment of the National Statistical Institute of Trinidad and Tobago. 4 leaders requested that the work be done speedily. The Prime Minister, his words were, "Make it quick." The Chief Justice, "Please make that task force do its work very, very quickly because we need reliable data." The former Chief Secretary of the Tobago House Assembly, he says, "Make it quick." And the Minister of Planning and Development, "Make it right, but make it quick." So all these 4 leaders, they agree and express a sense of urgency to fix the national statistic problem that exists in the CSO. Yet 6 years after, we are still without the NSITT. It has not been established as yet. However, while we wait for the establishment of TT, Tobago still have a data need. The Tobago House Assembly still need access to an adequate database with social and economic data on Tobago because the current database at the CSO is inadequate. The THA still need administrative data, example trade data, and data on tour operators. And also the Tobago House Assembly still need to collect data on surveys data, GDP, national accounts, to name a few. Now, the THA can only collect data in collaboration with the CSO for it to be considered official statistics. Okay? And that's why the best approach to get an adequate database with social and economic statistic that is Tobago specific is through a collaboration between the CSO and the THA. Fact number one, both the THA and the CSO are agencies within the National Statistical System, even though the CSO has a coordinating role to play. Fact number two, the Statistics Act provides the legal framework for the CSO to conduct any census and collect any data within Trinidad and Tobago. And fact number three, the Tobago House Assembly Act gives the THA a mandate to collect timely and reliable data specific to the need of Tobago. So whereas the law gives both these agencies a mandate to collect data, however, in the case of the THA, we must collaborate with the CSO in order to obtain official statistics. And collaboration is more than just using the same methodology and the same classification that the CSO is using. It is making the CSO part of the data collection process and also the analyzing process. So to put it in one sentence, I put it like this: the THA must collaborate and have to collaborate with the CSO to ensure that sustainable systems are put in place to collect both administrative data and survey data for the development of Tobago. One approach to this is to establish a capacity building project. The THA can design a project to strengthen the institutional capacity of the THA to collect both administrative data and survey data. This project can be funded either by the THA or CDB or by the IADB. After this project is designed, we can engage an international statistician. This person would come, the THA would hire this statistician on this special project and assign this statistician to work within the CSO. And by law, that person must report to the head of the CSO. But by the design of the project, this person would also have to interface with the THA. And that would call for cooperation and collaboration between both the THA and the CSO. But in addition to engaging this international statistician, we must surround this international statistician who is high skill and top class. We must build a high-powered team around this statistician. He would need, or she would need persons like sector specialists, economists, researchers, programmers to help in the analyzing of the data. But additionally, this person would need a professional team of interviewers for the data collection process. Okay? Because the integrity of the data is most important. And the only way to guarantee that we get reliable data is to get a professional team of interviewers. One example where this is needed at present is where the COVID-19 database in Tobago is concerned. Even as they are missing data issue and they are incomplete data set, the solution is to place more attention on the professional team of persons that is collecting the data. So we need to build a team of high-powered team to have proper data collection in Tobago. And as it relates to the shifting or the transition of the CSO to the NSITT in Tobago, we must remember that Tobago is a small island that is still developing, and there are data collection initiatives that Tobago want to undertake that Trinidad might not want to undertake. For example, trade data between Trinidad and Tobago or tour operators data. But even though Trinidad may not care about these data, the NSITT in Tobago must ensure that the data that the THA cares about those data are collected. One way to ensuring this is to ensure that the head of the new entity in Tobago is at the level at a deputy director to the head in Trinidad. This would give Tobago or the head of this unit in Tobago the influence to influence the process and also to give the Tobago office that autonomy that is needed to do the data collection that is needed in Tobago. The next issue is the culture shift which is needed. Even though the task force has written the report, the bill, a draft has been written, the budget would be approved. These are all things at the beginning. But the real change that is needed is a cultural change. And we cannot leave that cultural change to chance. The primary champion of that culture change would be the director or who is heading this unit. And as Mr. Clifford Lewis would say, a former statistician within the CSO, the culture of the organization and the role of the director in creating and fostering that culture would be the heartbeat of the organization. So the behavior and the value that these workers come, that is as important as moving from one entity to the next. Because culture will always eat strategy for breakfast. I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Mr. Perry, for that. Getting into really what Tobago needs and what Tobago wants for its development. That spatial context is so critical because whereas in Trinidad and Tobago we are one, we do also know we are two because there is a specific dimension to what Tobago needs that has to be considered. Thank you for that presentation, and I hope it really gears all of us who may be subject matter specialists. What is the Tobagonian context of the NSITT, the National Statistical System, and what does Tobago need for its development? Thank you very much for your presentation. So as last but not the least, very important as a part of the conversation is Dr. Wesley Young, who will be bringing in the end of our session today. And I want to encourage everybody as he makes presentations, so please put your questions in the chat. It will facilitate us answering very quickly. So Dr. Wesley Young is the director of the International Cooperation and Methodology Innovation Center at Statistics Canada. Previously, he was the director of Economic Statistics Methods Division. With a background in statistics and survey methods, Wesley has over 30 years of experience working with data and managing people, providing methodological support to statistical programs at Statistics Canada, which is their official statistical organization. As the world of official statistics has been evolving, he has taken a keen interest on how modern methods, including data science techniques, can be leveraged to produce high quality official statistics. And Dr. Young will be presenting today for us on the future of National Statistical Office's new wave content, big data, artificial intelligence, and the evolution of data science. Dr. Young, over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Best-Downs, for that introduction. First of all, I'm extremely honored to be here, and I'd like to thank SALISES for organizing the panel, and in particular, Dr. St. Bernard for inviting me. I had the pleasure to visit Trinidad and Tobago on Port of Spain. It's been almost 6 years ago, and it was a great visit. The thing that I remember the most is how warm and welcoming and how generous the people of Trinidad and Tobago were. So I just wanted to mention that you know, it's a pleasure to be here, and I hope that a couple of the things I say resonates with the audience and the other panel members. Okay, so I'm going to try to keep this quick. It's very, very high level, and I'm just more trying to concentrate on sort of what do I think, and these are, again, my opinions and not those of Statistics Canada. Where are we today in terms of National Statistical Organization, or NSOs, and sort of where do I think NSOs are going? And it's interesting. that listening to the other panelists, some of what I'm said has also been discussed by the other panelists. So there is some consistency or coherence in the message. So what do we do today? Well, we all produce high quality information for governments, businesses, policymakers, and most importantly, in my mind, are citizens of our respective countries. It was Mr. Gabriel Gamez, who mentioned, data is data, raw data is interesting, but we need to move that from a raw data thing to actual information that's usable. And we do this a lot today, and I've just put a couple points. These aren't the only ways we do this, but we ensure high quality by essentially what we've been doing for many years is we've been managing that data collection process. And we've been doing this through censuses or surveys. And at least in Canada, through carefully selected administrative data. So we haven't been using just any administrative data. We were very careful in what we selected. The other thing which I think is very important is that we have developed frameworks to ensure the quality of this data, the raw data. We also, and in my mind, this is probably the most important part from speaking from a statistical point of view, is we have frameworks to ensure that we can do valid inference. So we have data on a portion of the population through a survey, while we have checks and balances in place that allows us to make inference to the population or the target population. As you probably know, this high quality, it comes with trade-offs. It's expensive, and I'm not going to lie, it is very expensive. And probably most importantly, it's very time consuming. Sir Ian Diamond mentioned the fact that when COVID came and the pandemic came, there was a need to have really, really quick data. Sometimes our typical surveys doesn't allow that. So those are a couple of the trade-offs. So where are we? Some of the NSOs are already there today. Some of them are going to be there tomorrow. So that's why I'm using sort of the today/tomorrow. Well, what are we going to be doing, or what are NSOs going to be doing? NSOs are going to be producing high quality information. There's no doubt about that. I just want to make sure that I'm being heard and checking the chat. So we will continue to produce high quality information. We are going to be, and we have been, and we will continue to be asked to produce more timely and more granular information. And in fact, I think we're going to be asked just to produce more information. So this is sort of the new wave content. We will have less reliance on surveys and censuses. We have already seen that in Statistics Canada, and I know we're not the only organization. We are going to rely less on surveys and censuses, and we're going to use more what I call secondary data. I love the term secondary data because it covers all types of data that we haven't collected ourselves. So I'm talking administrative data, transactional data, for instance, scanner data. How can we use satellite images, Twitter data, social media, Google Trends, and there's tons that I haven't covered. I think what we're going to end up doing is we're going to combine and integrate data from different sources, and this is how we're going to produce more information. And it may allow us to produce more granular information. There was a couple of good examples already discussed today. So what I see us doing is, in the past, we've been really a data producer or a data collector. We're going to shift from being solely a data producer collector, and we're going to be shift towards being a data user. We will continue to collect data, but we will also augment or increase the amount of external data that we're using. Sorry, I'm just, okay. So I couldn't, given that this was in the title, I couldn't ignore the role of big data, artificial intelligence, and data science. And I wrote that these are really intertwined. They come as a group for the most part. And why? Well, a lot of secondary data is big data. When you think about satellite images, scanner data, sensor data, I think Sir Ian Diamond mentioned they get 95% of all credit and debit transactions each day in the UK. That's got to be huge. That's huge data. And to do that, to process or to manage or to leverage that data, we're going to need tools. Okay, and this is where I think artificial intelligence and data science tools, that's where they're needed. Okay, they're going to be needed to ingest and process this data. Now, under ingest and process, I put in 2 points: data engineering. I was working on a project and worked with a data engineer, and it was absolutely essential. Okay, those skills are essentials. These are the people that are going to build pipelines that bring the data in. Data that we don't collect, unfortunately, isn't always packaged nicely. you know, it's not always used in the same format. It's not easily ingestible, and the skills of a good data engineer is essential, okay, to allow us to bring in the data. Because if we can't bring the data in, or to prepare the data in such a way that we can use it, if we can't do that, if we can't use it, well, we can't produce information. And then I said we also need data science. I've also put statistics, because this is sort of my own opinion here. I've heard a lot of talk about data science is going to solve everything and this, that, or the other thing. You know what? I see data science as tools. Okay. And underlying those tools has to be a foundation of statistics. So under ingestion and processing, we need to do data wrangling, data cleansing, whatever you want to call it. Things that we as official statisticians have been doing for many years with censuses and surveys. Once we have the data ingested and ready to be mined for information, well, we're going to have to develop models to extract that information from the data. So now I'm talking about statistical models, of course, but we can also talk about machine learning models. There's a lot of work that needs to be done for classification, occupation codes, industry codes. How do you classify images when you get satellite images of cropland? Well, how do you know what's wheat and hay, and I guess sugarcane would be more appropriate for the region. We don't grow a lot of sugarcane in Canada. Natural language processing is another aspect where there's a lot of classification. How can I mine either PDFs or documents to get information I'm looking for? We'll also be looking at prediction. So we already do prediction in my mind right now in classic or traditional survey sampling or survey processing through imputation. We're also looking at how can we use prediction to help with nowcasting. We talked about having the need for more timely data. Well, maybe we can be using modeling to come up with more timely data. So this is great. And you know, at 30,000 feet, it looks like, hey, we got everything solved. Well, we're not quite there yet. Okay, so there are some challenges with big data, artificial intelligence, data science. So I've put a couple here, and again, these are my opinions, and I'd be very open to have a discussion on this with participants in the audience. Training data. If you're going to do supervised machine learning, which a lot of what we do is supervised, you need training data. Well, where do you get that training data? Okay. Are we going to have to pay a lot of money to recode a bunch of stuff so we can get the training data? If we're using sort of, I would use the word found training data, data that we think can be used for training, well, I think we need to be very, very careful about representativity of that training data. Is there any, not unconscious bias, but is there any bias in that training data which will carry through to our model, our predictions, and so forth? Coverage of the training data. This is, to me, really important. I've worked with a gentleman, Dr. Sumin Tan from the ABS. He has a great example. If you want to predict something about wages, let's say, and your training data contains only males, okay, well, you can't use that model when you want to predict the wages of females. So this is, in my mind, very important, because at the end of the day, as national statisticians, we need to make inference to the population of interest. And if we're not careful about representativity, I question whether that is a valid inference. The other thing that we as official statisticians have to do is produce quality indicators. We have a policy at Statistics Canada that says that we have to inform users of data quality. Well, how do we do that with these new models, prediction type models? And a big question mark that has come up a lot is explainability. I hear a lot of people say machine learning is like a black box. Okay, we as official statisticians and providing information to policymakers and citizens, we have to make sure that they understand how things are done. We need to be transparent. So important aspects that over and above big data, artificial intelligence, and data science, data stewardship principles. These are becoming more and more important. We need to have standards or common concepts and definitions. This allows the interoperability of data. If we're combining two different data sources and they're using definitions, different definitions for the same concept, well, it's going to be very difficult to pull valid information or high quality information out of that. Protection of privacy. I put that plus social acceptance. The more and more we use data, we need to ensure that we protect the privacy of the people's data, but we also have to make sure that we have social acceptance. And there's some discussion about that. People have to support the use of data, okay, for the public good, as was mentioned earlier. Because in reality, NSOs were nothing without access to data. Disaggregated data, and this was well illustrated with the first talk. We need more granular information to help the most vulnerable. Okay, that was a really interesting graph showing, you know, the prevalence rate of COVID for the I believe it was Black citizens of Caribbean origin and so forth. You know, once you dug down into the more granular information, it really enlightened the subject. And in my mind, again, frameworks for quality assurance and valid inference, this is what we have to have in place. Okay, otherwise NSOs, I don't think will be continue to produce relevant, high quality information. So conclusion, the successful NSO of today and tomorrow, in my mind, okay, they're going to be integrators of data. They're going to use, I said, all sizes of data. So I said big, medium, or small, and they're going to be using data from many different sources. I think they're going to use artificial intelligence and data science tools. However, that's in addition to the current statistical tools. We cannot forget that what we have in place are good tools, and they're going to have to continue to be used. I think they're going to have to continue to be guided by principles, and this was great. I think the last talk mentioned it, use of standards, use of scientific principles. We have to continue to be transparent. If data users can't figure out where the data is coming from, their interpretation isn't going to be correct. People, if we're not transparent, people are not going to want to share data with us. And most importantly, is that if we want to continue to use data, we have to show that we are protecting privacy and confidentiality of that data. So people don't start saying, you know what, I'm not sharing information with you. So I'll wrap up with that. And I do look forward to a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Young. That ending conversation about transparency, I think that is a critical aspect when we have gotten into the field of big data and artificial intelligence. You know, we still do need to collect information and surveys and administrative data and so on, but people have to trust what we create and turn into information. So, you know, I think many of us who are in Trinidad know that there is always a question, what is our population, 1.3 million? And, you know, people, there's always a hesitancy around that number. And I think what you've brought together and what all the panelists have shared really echoes, you know, what's important when it comes to data. So we have a lot of questions, and I know some of the panelists have been looking at specific questions to be able to answer them in advance, and thank you for taking that time. So we want to go through and take the first rounds of questions. So I want to identify someone provided a question. I'll give 4 questions, and then we'll get into the answering of them. And the panelists can feel free to take on whichever questions they like. So first question, when will discussion begin with the National Strategy on Development of Statistics in Trinidad and Tobago amongst stakeholders? I am not aware if this is to be done in the near future. So there's a question as to when will more public consultations be held? Another question, according to Mr. Busby, there are deficiencies in the National Statistical Act, but was this communicated to the Joint Select Committee of Trinidad and Tobago Parliament? This committee was analyzing the statistical bill before it lapsed in Parliament. So there's a question there about, you know, advocacy in the process. And another question for Mr. Busby, how can ministries assist with the fluidity of information sharing to the CSO or any border institute when there are existing legislation such as the Freedom of Information Act being used to block timely use and data sharing? And another question that I will, you know, if anyone on the panel, even though it was originally directed to Professor Sir Ian, how has the UK's government system supported the work of the National Statistical Institute legislatively? And maybe anyone in the panel can reference another country, if not the UK. So I open the floor to the panelists.
May I?
Go ahead, Mr. Busby, and then I see Mr. Gabriel, he will take the next question, part of the questions.
Okay, two things, starting with the comment on the Freedom of Information Act. The Act, the Statistical Act, if my memory serves me correctly, provides an override to other bits of legislation that seek to hold back information, such as the provisions of the Freedom of Information Act. The Statistical Act can override that. So in terms of the Statistical Office receiving information of a so-called time-sensitive nature, that should not be a problem. Okay. There was the first question was, what was it? Just remind the first one.
All right. So first question to you would be, there are deficiencies in the bill, but was that communicated to the Joint Select Committee?
I want to believe yes, because I'm aware of the fact that after the bill was drafted, it went out for comment to a number of individuals and organizations. I was one of those privileged to see the request and to make comments, not only in respect of the NSITT, but another major data generating organization whose name I would not quote. And there is a bit of a problem in the legislation in that the minister can make recommendations to the proposed board of the NSITT directly and specifically, but at the same time, the same minister can make advances and approaches to the director of statistics or the director general to be of the NSITT. I see a bit of a problem there. Two things. It's one of power too. The minister, quite rightly, should be able to make policy recommendations to the board, and the board, through the act of hierarchy of communication, can filter that down to the director general. That's fine. But why do we have a separate direct pipeline from the minister to the director general? Not being personal or anything, I'm looking at the document. I see a bit of a problem there. The problem is in the response of the director. He is going to be intimidated by any minister, and his inclination would be to follow the dictates of the minister, not being over relational to recent events in the last week, but we saw an instance of that. And those who read it would realize that that's an untenable situation, as a situation to be avoided. So that's one of the main weaknesses of the bill as I see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Busby. So we still have the other question that was posed, the beginning question around the discussions related to engagement of all stakeholders. Gabriel, would you like to take on that question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I can take that one, but also maybe a little bit the other one. I fully agree with. I mean, I have not seen now the latest version of the draft bill. But there could be an issue there. What we want is actually the National Statistical Institute to have a status as a central bank, right? So to be professionally independent. Then we will have also to discuss how we want also this institution to be from a managerial perspective to be autonomous. There are two different things, but one can help the other. We are clear about that, and I don't want to go to discuss further this. The difference is that, of course, we have to be realistic. The bank is making money, the central bank. But the National Statistical Institute would always rely on the budget of the government, right? So this is something we will have to remember, and also to think about how are we going to finance the National Statistical Institute so that there are not indirect pressure on the National Statistical Institute if the data produced by this institute do not please some of the high-level people. So this is one point that is important. Another point was about the national, the legislation, right, that we were discussing. I also agree with what was said. What we call the statistics bill is the law about statistics, official statistics, rights and obligations. And then we have not only one, in some countries, even more of other legal acts that regulate the national data system, and not only statistics, the data system. One of those that is quite well known in the world is this one from the European Union, right, on privacy and data protection. Now, it's very important when these pieces of legislation are revised or developed that the Statistical Institute is strongly involved in the process to secure that these legal acts do not actually limit the right of the statistical office to have access to the data in order to produce official statistics. So this is extremely important, but we have seen from colleagues in the European Union that a good Privacy and Data Protection Act can actually facilitate the access to big data, for example, and administrative data, because we know then on which basis we are all working together. And this is an important point. What was the last question? And I mean, if there is still a question, was something, dear Madam Chair?
Yeah, there was. So it was in reference to that legislative support, which you kind of covered. And
yeah, okay. And one thing that is very important actually is that when I enter a country, when I'm requested to go somewhere to help them to develop a legislation, right? The first thing I do before even we speak about the law is that what kind of national statistical system do you want? What could work in your country? One thing that we cannot negotiate are the fundamental principles of official statistics and possibly also the regional code of practice. These are that's the backbone, right, of the national statistical system, because we want trust in the figures and in the system. Now, for the rest, we have to discuss. When we start this discussion, we don't discuss just with statisticians. We discuss with respondents. We discuss with data providers. We discuss with researchers. We discuss with the government, etc., to have a clear idea of what would be the best national statistical system for that specific country. Once we get this information, right, we think, how can we develop a legislation that would support that kind of national statistical system? Thank you.
Thank you so much for that explanation. And I do think it covers some of the other questions that have been posed in the chat already. So we had a question about you want to improve the statistics by giving the CSO more tools and materials. What about the national community's willingness to send data? I think you touched that in an excellent way in terms of how the transparency and the legislation could actually support that. So let's take another round of questions. Is there any member of the panel wants to add to the previous discussion?
Yes, one thing, please. In order to elicit a positive response from the general data provision community, that's households, business places, what can the CSO give back by way of analysis of some aspects of statistics? I am thinking right now about, let's say, a country like a region like Tobago. You have census data. What about the different communities? How much of the intimate life of these communities do we know? How much of their intimate life do the communities themselves know? Not to tell tales out of school, but I know of 2 studies, maybe 4 studies that have been done that have gone into the assets of communities. Now, this will form the basis of knowledge of the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities that the communities have to embark on projects to stop the drift of population of young males from the communities into Scarborough, as an example. Provide jobs, provide stability in family relationships, confine young men to one household because they're too tired to have 3 and 4 households after having meaningful work. And I'm not being funny at all. If these community studies are embarked on, it would be the result, it would be a very good jumping point for projects that would redound to the benefit of the communities and the increase of GDP. Thank you.
Thank you for your responses. The next round of questions I want to take and focus a little bit more on the human resource, because we have at least 3 questions related to the human resource capacity. So we have one question: how does the National Institute deal with training personnel across a decentralized national statistical system? We have another question that is following up on Dr. St. Bernard. Will the new Institute of Statistics be able to hire highly trained professionals from outside, or will it continue to make the tacit assumption that everyone starts at the bottom with a BSc and receives further training in a lifelong career at the Institute? It's a very interesting type of question here. And then we have one other question. Pull it up quickly. Would there be consideration for a regional or international collaboration for young and emerging statisticians? So all around the idea of how are we building capacity, much like the iceberg idea, from a technical standpoint and a human standpoint. I want to bring in Dr. St. Bernard and any other members of the panel who would like to discuss.
Okay, thank you for that question. And I think it is one that I can comfortably answer. With respect to training, I have to admit that there is training available for young statisticians in the region. And I don't want to sound as though I'm blowing my own trumpet, but I know at the University of the West Indies, we have had a program for the past 14 years offering training at the master's level. And prior to that, I know that at the University of Technology in Jamaica, what was previously referred to as CAST, and even in the University of the West Indies within the Faculty of Social Sciences, there was the BEST program, and many statisticians from across the region benefited from training through the CAST program. CAST became the University of Technology in Jamaica, and many also graduated out of the Faculty of Social Sciences on the Mona campus out of the BEST program. The most recent incarnation, of course, is the MSc Development Statistics. And one of the things that I do lament about that program is that it was born out of discussions among Caribbean statisticians. And I dare say that based on the knowledge I have, only 2 governments have actually spent their money on providing training to their statisticians in that program or other programs externally, for example, the University of Southampton program. I know the Barbadian government invested in its statisticians receiving training in both programs, and the government of Belize did invest in one of its students and so on. So I think, it's time that, different governments put their money where their mouths are and do provide the kind of support for persons desirous of training, regardless of where such training is available, because the training is all around. I spoke of the days when in the CSO we went to the IPC, the International Program Center at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and some people were trained in the Munich Center. The government did spend money on persons going to those training, taking advantage of those training opportunities. Also, what is also emerging in the Caribbean context, back in the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of talk about SISTAR, the Caribbean Institute for Statistical Training and Research. And just recently, within the CARICOM context, the CARICOM has been talking about eSISTAR, electronic sister, and the CARICOM is actually trying to put in motion, you know, a program of training that would really redound to the benefit of statisticians in the Caribbean. So the opportunities are there, the opportunities are emerging. It's just that, you know, the respective governments, and as said by one of the previous speakers, I think it was Gabriel, you know, at the end of the day, the governments are the ones who will have to invest in terms of, you know, strengthening and building capacity within the national statistical offices. And if they don't spend, then I mean, it affects the quality of the statistics that we eventually have at our disposal for use by those who consume such statistics. With respect to the question that was asked about if you enter with a BSc and you move up the ranks, based on what I could remember out of the deliberations of the task force on the NSITT, certainly provision is made to move beyond that and to really recruit statisticians on the basis of merit based on their qualifications and demonstration of experience. And I think we have moved beyond that in terms of that. You know, you enter and you move up the ranks and you are promoted as you move up the ranks. So clearly, if it is that we want an organization that is fit for purpose, we have to move beyond that kind of mindset. Thank you.
Yes, good day. As it relates to training, I think training should also be one of the functions of the NSITT. It should have a training component where they train not just the statistician in the public sector, but also the private sector in the methodology and the classification of what is used in the NSITT. I think also there should be a forum that is, we should create a forum where young statisticians can meet and network, for example, an annual conference. And we invite some senior statisticians where they can impart their knowledge to these young statisticians so that they can build that capacity in-house.
Thank you so much for that, Desmond. And I think that would be a great joy to many young statisticians to hear or see something like that come into play. And I think pretty important, the idea of networking within an association and amongst your field as a priority that helps move the level of advocacy around any subject matter forward. Mr. Busby, go ahead.
Yeah, I just couldn't help but raise a possibility. We have a national statistical system, statisticians out in various ministries. What is the career path of a statistician in the Ministry of Health when there are just 7 people and 2 statisticians? He has nowhere to go. Will the statistical system be forward-thinking enough to create a path, a spiral path among statisticians, regardless of which ministry they come from, to create some sort of career path? Otherwise, we might lose those statisticians to other agencies, perhaps in the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Busby. I see Mr. Gabriel with his hand up, but I also want to challenge the panel. Do we only need statisticians within the official system? And Gabriel, you talked about the ecosystem and what are the possibilities, especially now with programs like R, GitHub, all of these other resources out there in which young statisticians can be engaged. Gabriel and then Dr. St. Bernard, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. it's important. I mentioned also something in the chat that we need also to improve our user statistics and data literacy, right? If our users don't understand statistics and data, they are not going to use them to take decision. If they don't use them to take decision, they don't put money into statistics. If they don't put money into statistics, we have weak or lousy infrastructure, human resources, and so on, because we don't have the money to pay them. And eventually we have poor statistics. So this is a vicious circle, and we want to go out of that. So it's very important also to improve the literacy of our users. That's a fundamental point. Another one we will have also to think. It's the size of the country. How many specialists, data scientists, do you want in all the ministries? You need in the ministries people that understand data, can manage data, can use data for their decision, but also maybe address requests to the Statistical Institute on what kind of information they need or they're going to need to take decisions. Now, I believe that for a country, so usually I use this argument for the seeds, right? But I mean, Trinidad and Tobago is a seed. I mean, is that use National Statistical Institute the center of competence in the country, right? I mean, it should not be. I mean, we understand that administrations are collecting data through their regular activities, and they will continue because this is part of their mandate. But other administrations should not launch heavy surveys, complicated sampling survey that are not actually performed by the Statistical Institute. The expert and the specialists are there, and if there is a need, they can conduct that and eventually then share the result with the government, the population, the different communities in the country, right? But this is something that is extremely important. We don't have enough money, right? We don't have enough money. That's a problem we have in most of the countries to really support statistics disseminated in all the ministries. Make people in the ministries capable and competent to use statistics, and move the center of competence in the National Statistical Institute. This is an advice I would give. This is not the UN advice, the official one. It's my private one from my experience working with countries in Africa, in Asia, and other parts of the world. Thank you.
All right. So just as a matter of protocol, I know there's some other comments we want to have, but we only have about 3 minutes left, and we do want to thank everybody who is here today. So Dr. St. Bernard and Mr. Busby, if I can, with your consideration, either we can be very short so that we can move on to the vote of thanks and the close, or if you all are willing to forego your conversation, and maybe this is the impetus to have that same type of ongoing conversation with statistics and statisticians and people in data. Gentlemen, are you all willing to forego, or you'll need to make the intervention?
I was waiting on Dr. St. Bernard, but certainly there is need for a different forum, another forum. So we should end the discussion here, and as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Thank you so much. Doc, what say you?
Let's end at this point, because I know we have run out of time, and people have other things to do. So.
All right. So I think if nothing else, this has given a real push to this conversation, a way in which we can visually see a path forward in terms of engaging each other, creating spaces for this conversation. And so I want to welcome, as we talk so much about the young people, or the young statisticians of the region and what we might do, I want to welcome Ms. Samantha Morgan. She's a graduate of the MSc in Development Statistics, to move the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Chair. With a grateful heart, I would like to say thank you to all of the panelists for agreeing to participate and for their informative and insightful presentations. Professor Diamond, Dr. Abdulkadri, Mr. Busby, Dr. St. Bernard, Mr. Gamez, Mr. Perry, and Dr. Young. Sincere thanks to all who work behind the scenes, the staff involved in coordinating this event, especially Ms. Kathy Modest, Ms. Francine Allen, Mr. Sheldon Warner, Mr. Ephraim Thompson, and the entire SALISES family. Also, thank you for the efforts of the marketing and communication team in bringing this broadcast over virtually, especially Ms. Joseanne Green, and the CITS at SALISES posted event artwork on the website. Thank you to our moderator, Mrs. Tessa Bess Downs, for your time and guiding us seamlessly through the session. Thank you. Thanks to you, the viewers, for tuning in and submitting your questions. And a special thank you and salute to the Acting Director of SALISES, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, for your dedication, vision, and advocacy for statistics and making use of technology to continue communicating the importance of statistics in making evidence-based decisions. Cheers to you.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for the warm thank you. The main hope of all of these fora are to start a fire, to get people interested, to make movement forward in all of our discussions. And I think from everything that has been said today, it is clear that maybe statisticians, we need to form our own sort of grassroots movement to get a lot of what needs to be done move forward. And so, as Samantha would have said, thank you so much for everyone's presence, their engagement. Thank you to the panel, and SALISES particularly thanks you for the time spent, although we went over time. Thank you for your patience, particularly in engaging this. On behalf of all, have a lovely day, stay safe in the midst of this global pandemic, and hopefully you will see this again either on YouTube or you will continue to tune into SALISES virtual fora. Goodbye, everyone.